Okay guys, with the spider gears and the side gears, the clutches themselves aren't grabbing properly. Okay. Rear wheels removed. Next step in the process is going to be removing the pinion pin and the C-clips so that we can move the axles out of the way so that we can get this carrier assembly out. So what I found is if you just clamp a set of vice grips right here in between the bottom and the housing and the ring, it holds that from spinning well enough to take loose this, call it a pinion pin retaining bolt. It's an 8mm closed in wrench. Better off just doing it with a wrench. Now that you got that out, you need to be careful. Reason why, that stupid pin can slide back. Push in on those axles and fish out the C-clips. Okay, got one of the C-clips out. Oh yeah, this is that stupid one. There's little O-rings Ford put receiver groove of the axles, I guess to keep them from rattling or moving or something. We got both C-clips out. If you guys can see that. Basically, you're going to take your pin retaining bolt out through its hole. Then you got to access one clip from one side of the window, rotate the carrier over, access the other one, push your axle in that you're working on. The back side of the C-clip should be facing you, and you should be able to just grab it with a magnet and pull it out. Sometimes you got to take a little screwdriver and just kind of pull it towards you. Man, there's a lot of flop. Next step, we're going to try to pull that carrier out. Start getting windy right when I start working. Ooh, that was pretty easy, didn't it? What I did was I cleaned out a separate catch can, whatever, to make sure it hit something other than the concrete. Those little caps came right off. That was no big deal. Keep your caps orientated between left and right. You'll have arrows pointing outward. These things cannot be interchanged. Trying to see how tight this thing was up in there. She's pretty tight. Let's see if we can get it to be nice and just walk out of there. It may not look like it's moving. I don't really care that much about the carrier, but I want to reuse that gear. You would think it would come out easier than this, but you'd be wrong. I've done this type of procedure years ago on 9-inch and 8-inch Fords. Okay guys, took a bigger tool and a little bit of leverage. That thing had absolutely zero side-to-side clearance. The old carrier, I didn't even drop it. That was kind of cool. Probably because it was so hard to get out of those saddles that as soon as it started to move, I could grab a hold. Okay, we got this thing pulled out of the rear end. First observations is going to be the carrier bearings on the old carrier. They're pretty smoked. They're not what they call flaking or completely disintegrated, but they've definitely been hot. I don't know if they were run low on fluid. They don't roll as good, and you can see the heat discoloration on the actual bearing. What I was told was to look for flaking, discoloration, general deterioration, kind of like a porous or pitting of the surface. Because if you, I don't know if you guys can see it, but in that reflection you can see like a dark ring. That's just a heat transfer and wear pattern. And this one isn't as bad as this one. This one has a much larger discolored wear, we'll just call it pattern on the race, but it also has heat cracking. It's got a discoloration from wear. It's got a little bit of a porous texture to it where the polished finish of the race has been eroded away. Plus it's got that heat checking or heat cracking in it. I would not reuse races that look like this. Races interchange. The bearings and the races are interchangeable. 8.8, grab one out of an F-150, get one out of an Explorer. If it's an 8.8, it'll interchange. Is one that's been rebuilt to have more clamping force and more friction and a very thick, tightly shimmed clutch pack. So it's going to be a vast improvement over that wore out factory clutch setup in that Explorer did. Plus this one that I know is shimmed tight as the moon to act almost like a locker. So anyway, that's just showing you the difference between a wore out Trac-Loc and one that's been rebuilt to have more clamping force. I was just saying, roll that beautiful bean footage. These bolts come out really easy. 3/4 inch. Some of them you see on these videos, as soon as they get the bolts out of it, the stupid thing just falls out on the workbench. But then other videos, it shows them taking a punch. I don't want to hurt any of these threads. The challenges of being one-handed. Basically what I was doing was just taking this, hitting around the bottom of these ring gear bolt holes from the carrier. Full honesty and disclosure, I had to put the old carrier in my vise, and that thing didn't want to come off there. But you know, we know who won in the end. I just kept hammering on it. I felt like I was almost bending my stupid punch, but finally it started showing a marked improvement. And once you go around it for the 50th time, yeah, she fell right off. It is a total pain in the neck to get it lined up with your holes, because your holes have to be darn near dead center. I could get 6 bolts in, but I had 4 that wouldn't start. Somebody explain that to me. I think the torque spec I found online was 80 foot-pounds, which is supposed to be, I believe, the ring gear bolt torque and the carrier bearing cap torque, I believe, is 80 pounds. Okay, finally got the pinion out of there. That was kind of a chore because you have to use a puller to get that companion flange, that round part off. Got the pinion out with the crush sleeve. A little bit better of a close-up. Yeah, this pinion bearing, she's not happy. She's not happy with me at all. Okay guys, day 2. I had to order in some parts because apparently the city area had carrier bearings in stock for an 8.8 rear end. Basically had to order 2 carrier bearings to be delivered this morning. Just wanted to show you how I was able to install my new pinion bearing. The way I got it off, a tie rod separator fork out of a kit up at Advanced Auto Parts. Now here's the trick. When you use the fork to remove this bearing, you can't just go straight down at it like this, because you run a chance of the end of your fork gouging the shaft of your pinion. So all you have to do is use one prong of it and go to the side of the shaft, back and forth. Just go like this. Do this side with a prong, this side with a prong, and what you'll be able to do is move it all the way down to the maximum thickness of that little pickle fork or prong, whatever you guys want to call it. I think it was about 3/4 inch, which wasn't enough to pop the bearing off of its seating surface, but it moves it out away from this pinion about 3/4 inch. Be careful if you got shims back there. Once you start getting that, because it doesn't take a lot of pressure at all. When you're using that wedge, this bearing will move fairly easy. So once you get a little distance in here, start protecting your shim. Once I spaced it out as far as I could by using that pickle fork on each side, I just took the pickle fork and put it underneath this cage and drove it until it popped loose from the pinion. I just took and cut all that off. I put a little bit of, it's kind of a combination of engine oil and STP I use for assembly lube. I just put a little bit of it on the shaft, started the bearing. I disassembled. I took a pair of side cutters, cut the cage, and then grabbed it with vice grips and just peeled it back off of there until all the rollers fell out. Then I put this in a vise and used, if I can get this over here, a sanding roll to open up the inside diameter of this bearing to where it won't get stuck, and used it as my driving tool with nothing more than a punch and a hammer. I just literally went side to side, just like this, and drove that thing all the way down to where it's seated, no problems. But that was the best thing I could come up with to mate that inside surface, because you cannot hammer on the cage or the rollers. And some of the videos I saw, people were using these punches to try to get down in between the cage. That's really dangerous. I don't recommend doing that. Just disassemble your old pinion and use it as your driver. That way you can just move around this surface with your punch. I used a bigger hammer because I wanted to be able to make sure I was getting a good solid hit on it. It was not mounted in a vise. It was literally just sitting right on this wooden bench, and I just kept working it until I got it to fully seat. Here is my companion flange to the 8/8, which I have to be able to hold steady to properly torque my pinion. Get my pinion preload. I have to be able to keep this from turning. So I'm going to these inside. The plan is, because these holes actually line up, I'm going to drill press these holes, bolt this to that companion flange, so this thick wall square tubing will hit the, it'll either hit the ground or the car, I don't know yet. I'd rather it hit the ground so I don't bend anything. And it'll be bolted down with 2 of these bolts. Get all this set up and try to get this thing put back together today. You guys keep watching.